Continuing our series of lectures on argumentation for AP English Language and Composition, this is lecture 3, writing the essay. Today we're going to talk about the introduction. Okay, talking about the introduction, there are really 3 questions that you want to answer, or 3 concerns that you want to keep in mind. What is the topic of the conversation? What is the context of the conversation? And what is the thing you're trying to prove, or the thesis of the conversation? Essentially, what you're doing is you're establishing what you're going to talk about right at the beginning. You're providing information about that idea, perhaps a definition, perhaps an explanation if the topic is a little complex, and a thesis or a clear roadmap or a clear approach to the issue that says what you believe and why you believe it. These are the 3 things that go in an introduction. Again, what are we talking about? How is it relevant? How is it important? How does it work? And why do you think this way? All right. Now, this is the introduction example that we're going to be working with. I'm not going to read it now because I'm going to read it later in pieces. So if you want to pause the video so you can read it to yourself. All right, let's continue. So when writing introductions, you have to keep in mind that the first thought that you begin with, especially in an argument, has to anticipate the final thought, right? Arguments are so tricky. Arguments are built on claims, on a series of claims that often try to validate each other. And they use evidence, sometimes internal evidence, meaning the claims itself, or external evidence, meaning something historical, social, something political, something cultural, any of those things, philosophical perhaps. When when arguments are being built, there could be such a series of steps that while you begin with one argument, you might end up proving something a little bit different, not opposite of what you started with, just not exactly what you started with. So arguments have to be, you have to anticipate the final thought from the very beginning so that you don't lose your reader and yourself as you're writing it. So let's talk about how to compose the first sentence, the opening sentence. Now, this should be a topical sentence. Every first sentence of every paragraph, every time you write, should ideally be a topical sentence. It doesn't have to clearly state, here's what we're going to talk about, but it should give the reader some intimation as to what the conversation will be about, even if it doesn't fully explain. So here's the example that we're working with. Historically, humor has been used to mock society's hardships and difficulties to lessen the severity of a situation and to lighten the mood, yet these comedic productions often allude to much larger issues that can't be deliberately addressed by politicians or journalists because of societal norms and the sensitivity of society towards certain topics of conversation. I have an idea of what it is that she's going to talk about. She's going to talk about humor. And furthermore, she defines it for me. Humor is funny, it lightens the mood. But sometimes this funniness has another purpose. Something political, perhaps, something journalistic, perhaps, something that societal norms do not necessarily allow. So there's a complexity to the argument here, which leads into the next sentences. Now, in order to open the essay, in order to open specifically this essay, here are 5 tips that I'm going to give you that I think are useful. So, obviously, there are many ways of opening an essay, but the first thing is you always want to make a good first impression, especially true of argumentative. Argumentative essays are meant to persuade your readership. And if your reader is not impressed by you right from the beginning, if he thinks that you're not exciting, you have nothing fresh or interesting to say, or it just sounds very boring, he's not going to read your essay, or rather, he'll read it begrudgingly. So you want to make a really good impression. You want to impress them. This may not be true of, for instance, rhetorical writing, where the goal is really to analyze the devices and strategies. So it doesn't really matter how you open, as long as you get to the devices and the strategies and you analyze them, because that's the point. But here, now, it matters. Now, another tip is anticipate the content of the essay, right? So begin in a way that says, we are going to be dealing with this issue, right? You don't begin with something like, humor is an important part of society. In what way? How do you mean it? What kind of humor, right? Too many questions unanswered. Your first sentence should really be, it shouldn't be as maybe cumbersome as this one, because I understand that this one is a very lengthy sentence, but it should at least give people a feeling as to what are you going to talk about and how do you feel about it. Uh, Tip number 3, don't write empty openings. What is an empty opening? Well, it's an opening that has no relation to the rest of the essay. These are terrible, right? Those are the formulaic intro sentences that you used to write when you were younger that essentially began with something superfluous, something that didn't relate to the rest of the essay, right? It just feels like a 1980s intro to a movie. It has no relationship to the content of the movie, but they need something to grab your attention, and it just feels cheap. So you shouldn't do that. Don't try to just rearrange the prompt. Ah, AP readers hate this. I hate it. They might say it too. Don't just rearrange the prompt, right? Because it becomes obvious. We read the prompt every time that we read your essays. So you really don't want to do that. You want to find a more inventive way because it denotes a lack of creativity. Sentences that sound too formulaic. So, for instance, if you are in an AP class, your teacher is probably teaching you a formula, a way of writing. This isn't bad. But formulas, because they prescribe, they can also be restrictive. And that's the problem. You have to know the formula and try to subvert it, try to go beyond it, try to do more than what is asked of you in that opening. So you don't sound as robotic. I think the key is to begin in a way that the reader doesn't realize that you're using a formula. And by the way, most writing is formulaic in its own way. We all learn formulas. It's just a matter of making it look natural. So, number four, make sure that when you begin, that you could begin with the claim of the thesis. I've seen this done. I don't necessarily like it. I don't think it's bad, but some some arguments are so complex that really you don't want to waste your time. You don't want to linger in the beginning. You want to begin with your claim and then unpack it for the rest of the intro because it's going to take you a while to provide evidence or rationale or whatever. So this might be okay, but it has to be for those kind of things, right? And sometimes this could also be done for shock value, right? Because it attracts the reader. The reader says, whoa, that's very aggressive. I'm going to keep reading. So, tip number five is using a quotation from the text. Now, the text is often a quotation, so be careful with that. But if you have a larger text and there's something small that might begin, you could do that. I don't necessarily like beginning or ending anything with quotations. Uh, it just feels disingenuous and it feels like it takes away from my argument, and I wouldn't do that. But there are exceptions to this rule, which is why I put it here. So here's some more opening examples. Look at this one, for instance. This one is below adequate to this one, highly effective. Disobedience is a natural action one makes. It is bound to happen at some point, but it is through disobedience that one grows, learning from mistakes and blooming into a better person than before. It's not poorly written, but what is it that makes it below adequate? Well, it begins with disobedience, right? And then it says it is a natural action that one makes. Okay, it is bound to happen. But I thought one made it. What do you mean it is bound to happen? And it is through disobedience that one grows, learning from mistakes. Now, mistakes is conflated with disobedience. So disobedience is making a mistake. Is that what it means? But it makes you a better person. In what way? What does that mean? I don't get it, right? This is a highly effective, for instance. Human beings are defined and shaped by an amalgamation of interplaying factors that are invisible to the human eye. An opening can be more than one sentence. One such factor is the ability to communicate with others through polite and pleasant speech in order to create and maintain relationships. This addresses the prompt. The prompt was, what is the function and value of polite speech? And he says that human beings are defined by many things. And one of those things is the ability to communicate through polite speech because it creates and maintains relationships. Okay, it's very thorough, very comprehensive, and it works. All right, let's go to the middle part. The middle sentences, again, are about narrowing the scope of the argument, providing context. What are we talking about? Sometimes, if you're dealing with a word like artifice and you have to define it, right? Because definition is crucial in arguments. You control, you win. So, here's an example of how this writer narrows her focus from a general conversation of humor in its value society to what she wants to argue in her thesis. So, humorists use a lighthearted aspect of their work, the lighthearted aspect of their work, to merge the gap between the discussion of contentious issues and the often unexpressed polemic public opinion. Wow, okay. It's a dense sentence, but essentially, humorists are important because they use the lighthearted aspect of their work, their funniness, basically, to merge the gap or to build the gap between the discussion of issues that people don't want to talk about and things that are sometimes difficult to say, right? I mean, she's in many ways rephrasing the prompt, which is, or the quote, which is, humorists can get away with saying stuff, right? But it's also written in a way that is, well, it's very sophisticated. And I think that's what also makes it effective. Here are some more middle examples, right? We'll read, let's compare, for instance, the adequate and the above adequate, right? So these catchphrases such as "How are you?", "Nice to meet you," paradoxically convey a sense of care and curiosity toward the person receiving the expression while being nothing more than an empty gesture. This is almost verbatim what's in the prompt. That's why it's only adequate. I mean, they rephrase the stuff in it, but it's basically just rearranging the stuff in the prompt. I mean, that's not bad, but it doesn't make it look good. And I think that's the point. In an argument, there isn't any, well, there are some things that are bad, but for the most part, there aren't things that are really bad. But you miss opportunities to make more connections with your reader, to make yourself sound better, to explain more, right? That's why this is only adequate, above adequate. This is true for all types of disobedience, from the broadest of concepts, including political rebellions, to relatively minute disobedience at home. Disobedience represents our human will to change. It's a nice little change going from a longer sentence to a short sentence. What else is good about this? Well, here it says that it includes political rebellions and disobedience at home. So I have a feeling that the writer here might talk about that in the body paragraphs. So this is good. And in fact, they do. Um, so this is good. Anticipating what the bodies might be about in the introduction. It shows thoroughness. Well, that's why it's above adequate. All right, let's talk about the last sentence, which is your thesis: claim, evidence, rationale. These are the three steps: claim, evidence, rationale. In a pinch, you can forego one of these, evidence or rationale, but you definitely need a claim. It's a claim and evidence, or a claim and rationale. A what and a how, or a what and a why. You need two. You get to choose. All right. The role is essential to social progress. Here we're talking about humorous. I didn't include the first few words. In advancements, as seen in political cartoons that satirize the situation and highlight its flaws, and talk show hosts that have the ability to deliver unfiltered news and provide a more accurate representation of the issue. Wow, okay. Humorists have an essential social role for social progress. Okay, that's the claim. Right. Okay. Why or how? Well, I'm gonna say it in political cartoons. All right. I guess you're gonna tell me examples and the bodies. All right. And what else? Talk show host. Okay, that's the how. And why is it that political cartoons and talk show hosts? Well, the political cartoons satirize the situation to highlight its flaws. Okay, how about a talk show host? Well, they have the ability to deliver unfiltered news and provide more accurate representation of the issue. Oh, okay. All right, cool. So the thesis of the introduction in an argumentative essay should really be about presenting the information, not really explaining yet. It's just, I'm going to talk about this, and I'm going to talk about it this way, and I'm going to approach it that way. All right? An introduction is so crucial because it tells your reader, this is what we're doing for the next 2 pages, right? Follow me, right? You have to control the situation. You control the entire argument. That's the idea. Here's some more examples of a thesis. So here's a below adequate thesis. History has proven that safety has been prioritized over freedom and vice versa. These prioritizations are apparent in today's society more than ever. Why is this below adequate? I mean, is there evidence? Maybe history has proven. Maybe that's evidence, even if it is vague, because I don't know what history, like all of history, have proven this. Where? How? But really, what makes this ineffective is safety has been prioritized over freedom, and vice versa. So wait, your stance is that both, all of the above? That's your answer. The prompt here is, the human being, does the human being want to be saved more than he wants to be free, or free more than he wants to be saved? And they chose all of the above, right? I want the burger, I want the fries, and the soda. I mean, you can't have it all. And an argument has to be specific, and it has to have a clear stance. And all of the above is not a clear stance. It just denotes that you cannot make up your mind and you don't know what the answer might be. So you're, you know, checking all the boxes. Above adequate. Whether it's leaving your home country in a crisis or facing an event leading to stricter policies, it means being safer. Freedom can be traded in. Okay, there it is. That's great. When you are arguing, you have to pick a side, right? I know there isn't only two sides. We'll talk about that in another video about the complexity of claims. Um, but you do have to have a very specific stance, right? Here's the introduction, the complete introduction that we've been covering, if you wanted to look at it again. And here's some more examples, A, B, C, and D, examples that detail introductions that are above adequate. In the next slide, you'll see another one as well. If you want to pause the video so you can read it on your own, you can do that. And the next two are above adequate and effective. All kinds of introductions that demonstrate, according to an AP reader, what an effective introduction looks like. All right, that's been the end of the video. Thank you so much.